Yes, indeed. 'Tis only the flame, quivering at misguided ash. I will snuff out these ashes for good. Anyways, I've been playing Nightreign, and it is so surprisingly good. My surprise and delight at its weird, interesting design reminded me of my disappointment with Elden Ring. I didn't really like Elden Ring. It's not a bad game, and there were aspects of it that I found really fun. Love me a horse and some horseback combat. The game is beautiful, and the environments and enemy design are so diverse and well crafted. The world feels large and rich, but coming into it primarily as a lover of the previous From Software games, I think mashing together the Souls-like mechanics with the open world genre created something imbalanced, undirected, not elegant. Well, that's a bit of a cold take. It's been a few years. Well, I have a new personal rule not to spend an entire video shitting on something, and the new Nightreign game is actually surprisingly good, specifically in all the ways that Elden Ring isn't. Nightreign was released a few months ago as an Elden Ring spin-off standalone game. Nightreign does an excellent job at pulling the best and most compatible mechanics of Souls-like games, along with, I don't know, battle royale and roguelite mechanics, and it manages to create something innovative that works really well. Elegant. And since I'm already making a video analyzing Souls-like mechanics, I would be remiss if I didn't offer up for comparison Lies of P, which, in my humble opinion, is the best evolution of the Souls-like genre I've seen. It's a game where you play as a small Pinocchio snack, upgrade your P organ, and break free of your robot puppet shackles. By line. Great. So join me as I painstakingly dissect what's great about Souls-likes, how Elden Ring kind of butchers the Souls-like mechanics, how Lies of P evolves them, and how Nightreign innovates. A fish interlude. Now, to quickly illustrate my point, imagine Souls-like mechanics as this nice, crispy, fried fillet of soul. Crisp, flavorful, beautifully seared. Maybe a few bones to pick, and the flavor isn't palatable for everyone, but not bad. Now, consider this plain oatmeal as the base mechanics of open world games. When you add something to the oatmeal, open world games can be super fun. For example, Red Dead Redemption 2 adds storytelling and a profound depth of poignancy, and complex and intricately designed landscapes. Apples and cinnamon sugar. Bad open world games, don't add much of anything in particular. So their oatmeal is bland, and oh boy, well, there's a lot of it. Okay, so the dish of Elden Ring mixes together the lightly fried fillet of soul into the oatmeal. And it does make something pretty good. Like fish congee. But if you're a big fan of the Souls-like elegance and crispiness of their mechanics, well, oh no, the fillet of soul is kind of soggy, diluted, and we made it worse. We elevated the oatmeal, but at the cost of the flaky fish. The Lies of P dish is an evolution of the Souls-like mechanics, like a nice, tasty snack of soul sashimi with a nice, light shoyu wasabi glaze. Elegant, refined, no bones. Nightreign is like a bowl of soul poke. You mix in some roguelike and some battle royale mechanics, and, well, you get something new and weird, but complementary. The ingredients lift each other. Nice. Also, expect mechanical spoilers, so I can talk about the systems, but I'll avoid story-based spoilers until the final section. Part 1. How the Souls-likes handle difficulty. From Software's traditional Soul-like games are pretty difficult. I'm only going to dip my toe into the larger debate of should Souls-likes have an easy mode, to say I think the most fundamental aspect of From's Soul-like games is the extremely tightly tuned difficulty progression. I mean, you're not playing just to talk to these weirdos.
So, what did that giant mushroom make you do?
A horrible goat demon has moved in below.
Yes, the games are difficult, but that difficulty is a precise tool for increasing and releasing tension. The hallmark of these games is that you can't feasibly brute force or grind your way through. You have to be careful and nimble and patient. What's initially deceptive about the Souls-like games is the difficulty isn't just in the punishing mechanics. The difficulty is also in the game's inscrutability, and the challenge of both recognizing and learning the intended playstyle. let's talk about inscrutability. Getting good is actually a fairly apt, if not eloquent way, of explaining that you have to become fluent in the Souls-like skills. Reading animations, exploring slowly and methodically. If you come at a Souls-like, like I did initially, from the mindset of other games, where grinding and brute forcing is enough, it will be impossibly hard. My first experience was downloading Dark Souls 3, learning from the tutorial how to use my fancy pyromancer flame, waltzing into the fight with Gunder, and dying repeatedly until I gave up. The game was too hard for me to brute force. And the tutorial does not, in fact, explain that no, you can't just use your traditionally OP ranged fire attack from a distance to avoid interacting with the boss. He will come to you. And when he does, no, you can't just hold up your shield and take all the hits. You don't have the stamina. You'll need to dodge roll. The tutorial also does not tell you that even though it looks like he still hits you when you're rolling, there's this mechanic called invincibility frames. You have to get good. That really just means changing your playstyle and strategy. But if you don't realize that, it makes the games seem impossibly hard. Only a gaming god could defeat Gunder. No, getting good just means toning back aggression, being careful and patient and precise. Most bosses can kill you in just 2 or 3 hits, but you learn the timings and the dance. I was lucky to have a friend who walked me through my first fight with Gunder, explaining to me the knowledge framework I was missing. I beat Gunder, went home and started Dark Souls 1, and was never able to have a polite conversation about video games without bringing up SoulsLikes ever again. But that first fight with Gunder felt amazing. I still remember it so well. I had accomplished what hadn't even seemed possible. Even later, whenever I'd try a boss for the first time, I'd always think, well, that's not going to happen. When I didn't know what the wind-up animations meant, they meant death. But by trying again and again, I became fluent, learned where to roll, what to block. That's why the games are so memorable. They keep throwing you in front of some eldritch, ancient being that feels impossible, and yet you make it possible by being clever and patient. You bring the gods to their knees, not just by leveling your character's in-game strength or dex points, but by being more skillful as a player. You won. You are the Sword Saint. But it's not just the combat mechanics that are inscrutable. In Sekiro, when you die a few times, suddenly the NPCs start to drop like flies with dragon rot, meaning that the game is seemingly punishing you for dying. Dragon rot locks away NPC quests and possibly merchants. Great. As they all became infected, I started to panic and was only calmed by a Reddit comment from Prepare to Sigh saying, "It's unnecessarily stressful for new players, and as far as I'm concerned, it's a pointless mechanic in the game." Great. There are a lot of game systems that just aren't explained. For example, stats have a soft cap where putting in more points doesn't continue to scale them. What's up with poise in Dark Souls 3? Why is faith? There's a trove of online information about these games, and interacting with this information affects the difficulty. The Souls-like games also have built-in difficulty sliders. They're just difficult to find. Dark Souls 1 in particular absolutely has an easy mode. Pyromancy plus strength plus shields. This makes me want to make a beginner's guide. But basically, in a questionably intentional design choice, the power of the pyromancy flame is decoupled from the leveling system. Normally, if you want to level both strength and dex, each level put into either makes the next more expensive. But since pyromancy is its own leveling system, upgrading it doesn't affect the cost of upgrading your other stats. It's like a free stat. And also, the pyromancy guy is such a cool dude.
Oh yeah, by the way, I can share the spells with you. I think you have a knack for it, all you need are the materials. I'll be pleased to help you. Unless you find the magic's unsavory.
And a lot of the early game bosses are weak to fire damage. Shields are pretty effective in Dark Souls 1, and even though you still have to learn how to manage your stamina across different boss movesets and swap shields for different damage types, it's a totally valid and rewarding way to get through the game, especially a first playthrough. Dark Souls 1 also has various built-in cheeses, where if you do the right thing, you won't even fight the boss. There's also one unintentional, but entirely necessary cheese, because what the fuck were they thinking with— Also, speaking of implicit difficulty sliders, the DLC bosses are way harder than the base game bosses, but they are also absolutely the best, and like, if you finish the base game and you still want more, why not make it more of a challenge? So yes, difficulty sliders exist, but are pretty inscrutable. So the Souls-like games are effectively more difficult through obfuscation. Okay, so you've pushed past the inscrutability, and you come face to face with the raw Souls-like mechanical challenges. And they are really beautifully designed. These games use difficulty as a tool so effectively to craft an incredibly rewarding experience. But what goes into that? The reason I think the difficulty tuning is so fundamental to these games is that there's a fairly small window between too easy and too hard. What you might not fully realize is that designing a game right smack in the sweet spot of rewardingly difficult is a challenge. Game designers can always make games arbitrarily difficult. You can always make jumps harder to land, make animations hard to read or predict. Too easy looks like defeating the boss before you really get a chance to learn their moveset. Too hard looks like having to play perfectly for too long. My favorite streamers will defeat late game bosses on Soul Level 1, and they take up to like 8 minutes of playing perfectly. These streamers are impressive and fun to watch, because this is arguably not really possible even with practice for the average player. They would give up and go hollow. So how do game devs find and control the sweet spot? Well, because the games are mostly linear, the developers can basically guarantee a fairly narrow range of what level your character will be, and your rough DPS for any given boss. They can guarantee this because grinding your level outside of that narrow range isn't really feasible. There's polynomial growth between the levels, so you can grind a few, but it will quickly take more and more time. What's interesting about this design from a player perspective is that grinding doesn't feel very effective. A few levels won't make the boss meaningfully easier. But why is this? It's because the devs are particularly clever by having your damage output be effectively a combination of your level and your weapon upgrade, which has a scaling multiplier. Because of that multiplier, you can grind your level, but without also upgrading your weapon, it won't make a lot of difference. And while enemies respawn, weapon upgrade items are much harder to get and are gated by max upgrade level. Sekiro gates the player level very effectively by having health and poise beads only be received from defeating mini-bosses, and attack power only increased by defeating bosses. In the Souls games, by using these two systems together to narrow the level window players will be at, the devs can tailor a fairly predictable experience for each boss. How many attempts to learn the moveset? How many before players give up? And because the boss difficulty is tuned so consistently, players trust the developers that the boss they're struggling against is possible. That trust is what is needed to push through the unpleasantness of dying over and over, because it'll be worth it. It's not impossible, it's just a challenge. Summons are a more transparent way developers allow players to adjust the difficulty, and while not perfect, they can help when player skill is not quite high enough for the default level range. Most of the single enemy bosses in the earlier From games are not really designed to handle multiple attackers. Their movesets kind of break down, and the fight becomes either, I'm currently targeted, so I'm going to run and dodge, or I'm not currently targeted, so I'm going to attack. Summons aren't entirely OP, however, because they're given a fairly high cost. Each attempt requires a humanity or an ember that are limited, generally non-droppable items, or are gained during multiplayer interactions. Summoning significantly increases the boss's health. The NPC summons have limited health and often don't last the whole fight. And the players you summon sometimes aren't the most helpful. Summons can best be used when you've mostly learned the moveset, but you just need some help to push you over the finish line. But they're not just going to give you a win on your first attempt. They are, however, very good for multi-bosses. Remember how I said, oh, the games are so fair, just a nice dance between you and the boss? Well, not when there's more than one boss and you're fighting the camera just trying to keep track of them. I played all the games the first time with no summons because I wanted to prove to myself that I could do it. All me. Also, my friend told me that summons were basically cheating, and I believed it as part of the whole get good thing. But replaying the games to get footage for this video, I noticed how much the games actually kind of push you to summon.
Anytime you see my brilliantly shining signature, do not hesitate to call upon me. You've left me with quite an impression. I would relish a chance to assist you.
And I always hated the multi-bosses the most because they felt unfair. So now I summon for multi-bosses, and they feel fair, and also still very rewarding. It's like a group fight instead of a dog pile. Another way these games are able to be difficult so effectively is by being fair. The animations are skillfully designed to give players a fair chance to counter, usually. The boss makes a warning movement you can read, and there is a response you can give. Another very important aspect is the predictability of the hitboxes. If you read the attack and make the correct response, you should not be clipped. A lot of design and tuning and testing goes into making sure the experience of getting hit is, oops, instead of, Wait, what? Getting hit is a nudge for a correction in your dance. From Software's games obviously aren't perfect, but Souls-likes from other studios that fall flat generally don't use the difficulty to teach a dance. They are punishing for the sake of punishment, which honestly isn't very fun or rewarding. You don't win through skill, you just finally get lucky with RNG or whatever. Being fair means being consistent and mostly predictable. Overall, the From Software games are both initially inscrutable and mechanically difficult, but the careful, tight design and tuning makes them feel fair and very rewarding. So let's talk about Elden Ring. How Elden Ring handles difficulty. You are Miyazaki. The year is 2016, and you are sitting on more money than God from the immensely successful Dark Souls 3. But what's next? You already have your pet project Sekiro in the pipeline. You absolutely cannot make another Dark Souls game without falling prey to the very cycle of rekindling the flames of the dying worlds that Lordran and Lothric warned against. That's right, Dark Souls is an allegory about letting go. The correct choice in the two Dark Souls games is to let the world fall into darkness. Despite its heavily Catholic aesthetic, it's very Buddhist in its philosophy and focus. Right, so you can't make another Dark Souls game, and you already have your dream pet project Sekiro in the pipeline, so what will you do with your mountains of money? Open world games are expensive, let's make one of those. Elden Ring inherits a lot of the same mechanics as the earlier From Software Souls-likes. The bosses are difficult and have the same call and response movesets. There are runes, that you can lose if you die. There are difficulty sliders, like summons. But in Elden Ring, the bosses are clearly designed from the ground up to handle multiple attackers, which is great. But why do I think the Souls-like mechanics don't succeed? I think it really comes down to being open world instead of linear. The difficulty can't be precisely tuned. My personal experience playing was pretty jarring. I started in Limgrave, and after really enjoying defeating Margaret, I decided to go east to Caelid. I was doing fine and having fun until I got to the stupidest boss imaginable. Fucking Radon. I really hated this boss, but I assumed it was hard because it was just a stupid boss, not because I went the wrong way. After defeating Radon, I was like, well, I guess I'll go south. Except now I was super overleveled. It was so easy, it wasn't really fun. So then I went to Lemuria and never figured out how to get into the academy. So I cleared the whole zone, tried to go north, and then had to look up what to do. So when I finally fought Rinoa, I was way overleveled and beat her on the first attempt. This bouncing around of over and underleveled felt endless. I beat Rykard also in one attempt, so I decided to intentionally stop leveling, which I did until I hit Malenia. And then I was like, well, fuck. So I did some grinding, going back to the parts of the map I had skipped, had a pretty balanced fight with Malenia, and just stomped the whole rest of the bosses. And it sucked. Like, Mog seemed like he had something really cool going on in his second spooky blood phase, but I'll never know what that was because I just killed him. Other than Margaret and Malenia, I never felt like I really learned a boss moveset. Never felt like I was doing the fun call and response dance I love so much in a Souls-like. I tried to self-adjust by purposefully not leveling, not using summons, but I didn't really know what difficulty I should be tuning each fight to. It felt unsatisfying and disappointing. And to be clear, I'm not saying, oh, I'm so good at Souls-likes, it was just easy. I'm saying I'm not good enough at Souls-likes to be taking out a boss I just found on the very first attempt. So if I am, something is kind of broken. I think in retrospect, one issue I had coming from other Souls-likes was that I poured all of my leveling points into just the stats corresponding to the weapon I wanted to use. Some health and some stamina. In part, this game is meant to be more approachable, which means it's okay if you don't spend your levels wisely because you can always respec. Which is fine, it just meant that I never really had any desire to respec, and I was too powerful too early. Another issue was that I was able to upgrade my weapon too effectively. The weapon upgrade tiers are fairly locked by region, but the regions themselves are not locked, so just in the act of exploration, I could upgrade my weapon too high. And to be fair, I think this is a really hard design problem. How to balance a boss experience when the range of possible player levels and weapon upgrades is massive. The only thing I can think of is having the fights be level agnostic, or scale to your DPS. But that kind of defeats the purpose of all of the resource collection and crafting and like the whole open world part. At the end of the day, open world games are about grinding for stuff, and that's okay. Like, in Red Dead Redemption 2, there was nothing I enjoyed more than taking a break from the grumpy cowboys at my camp, arguing about Tahiti, to go off in the woods and just hunt some moose. But I wasn't playing Red Dead 2 for the boss battles, just the vibes and the story and the moose. So they can't make the open world parts meaningless for the boss fights because everyone would hate that. Another thing they could do is just gate the regions in the correct order, and they kind of do that later in the game, but it felt too late by then. Besides, there's a really fun mechanic where you can accidentally get teleported somewhere super difficult and have to find your way back, which I really enjoyed. They could also require you to completely grind out a zone such that the bosses were tuned for the highest possible level, but not everyone wants to grind and do all the stupid catacombs, etc. Open worlds kind of have to cater to different playstyles, and completionist and ambler are both valid. And Elden Ring does a really great job of opening up the possibilities of playstyle. Summons now no longer have high costs, which means it's easier to play ranged and have summons pull the aggression. The ingredients you collect can be used to boost damage across exploration and more boss attempts. The player combat feel is so fun. There are so many interesting movesets and weapon arts. You can go and respec and try out different classes, but when you make the game easier, this inherently moves the focus and achievement to the player character, not the player. In From's traditional Souls-like games, I feel like I beat the boss. Oh No's is just my tool. In Elden Ring, I grinded and leveled up a character, and they used their cool attacks and high stats to beat the bosses. Instead of the systems empowering the player to learn the game's playstyle, character numbers just go up. I think this is a design problem without an elegant solution. I think by definition, if the mechanics and activities in open world games are supposed to increase the stats on your character and weapons, and you don't adjust the bosses to compensate, you're not going to be able to control the boss difficulty in a satisfying way. But not being able to control the boss difficulty creates another problem. You have to give the players the tools to control the difficulty. The tools themselves definitely exist. Elden Ring really increases the difficulty slider options and flexibility, but it's not clear how to use those tools to create a desired Souls-like experience. Why have such cool bosses if you're just going to fight them once? There are a lot of ways to play, just not the way I wanted. It just wasn't the challenge I was hoping for. I think it's great that some of my friends who were too intimidated by the previous Souls-likes really enjoyed the game, but I wish it had been easier and more approachable because they made the Souls-like framework less inscrutable, better tutorialize the mechanics, and encourage players to get outside their comfort zone, learn a new playstyle. If only there were a game like that. How Lies of P handles difficulty. I think Lies of P is the true successor to the evolution of difficulty and combat across the From titles. Each of the games has various mechanics that incentivize different playstyles. Demon's Souls and Dark Souls 1 are slow-paced. You can basically get through all of Dark Souls 1 by properly managing your stamina with a large shield, waiting patiently for your window of opportunity, and tapping R1. Aggression or getting greedy is punished, so the incentivized playstyle is very conservative. I think I went my whole first playthrough with nothing but left bumper block and right bumper attack. Bloodborne tries to incentivize more player aggression by both speeding up the animations and adding a mechanic called Rally, where if you are hit, you can recover some of that health by damaging the enemy in a short window of time. It also replaces shields with firearms to stun enemies and trick weapons that transform. I really liked the fast pace of Bloodborne, but I didn't really find the possibility to regain health as a compelling enough reason to be aggressive. I felt like the aggression was still punished more than what I would gain by attacking. I also really liked using the firearms, but found myself having to grind at times to get ammunition, which I really disliked. So I found myself avoiding using them to avoid having to grind. Next, Dark Souls 3 comes out and keeps the faster animations from Bloodborne and adds battle arts, fancy attacks you can do by using FP. It also has a boss midway through that I don't think is really feasible to defeat with a shield, just blocking and tanking. I played Dark Souls 3 as my second game after Dark Souls 1, and Pontiff Sulevan was the boss that forced me to learn to parry. Once I learned to parry, I found it so fun. I next went back to Dark Souls 1 and did a dex parry run and never looked back. I felt Dark Souls 3 evolved my playstyle by making me far more comfortable with dodge rolling and parrying, but I didn't feel incentivized to use the battle arts or even heavy attacks in my first playthrough because I felt like they were too long to time safely and I would be punished. Then came Sekiro. Sekiro is the distilled essence of the call and response dance. It's so fast, your responses all become pure muscle memory. No shields, just your trusty katana, your shinobi moveset, and prosthetic arm. Absolutely no notes on Sekiro combat. Several notes on Dragonrot. It's so dynamic. For one, there's no stamina at all, nothing to motivate pausing or backing up. Enemy attacks have a lot more range and mid-animation tracking to compensate. And, better than Rally in my opinion, Enemies will regain posture if you don't keep the pressure on. Also, I really loved the practice guy, Anbei the Undying. Bei was basically the reason I was able to get over the initial difficulty spike of the game's new mechanic, and get the muscle memory down. Lies of P was clearly made by a team who held not just a deep love and thorough understanding of From's SoulsLike games, they evolved them in a caring, elegant way that preserves the intent. They fixed my conservative combat habit of just muscle memory pressing right bumper over and over. They added a mechanic where if you do enough damage to poise, or posture, the enemy becomes vulnerable. However, you need to perform a single heavy charged attack to set them up for the critical hit. This was exactly what I needed to nudge me to actually vary my attacks. I started using more of a mix based on the timing windows and found it really rewarding. You also sometimes need to sharpen your blade or apply a damage type using a grindstone during combat, and the forced practice of doing this made me much more comfortable using them in fights. I feel so much more expressive in my combat in all the games after having played it. Lies of P also forces you to learn to parry. Similar to Sekiro, enemies have special glowing red attacks that you have to parry because you can't block and there are no iframes if you dodge. The timings are pretty reasonable though, so it's a good way to learn. You also get a Sekiro arm. They also try to incentivize aggression and not waiting too long between attacks, using a mechanic similar to Sekiro. If you don't get an attack in after a time window, they will regain some health. This worked so much better for me psychologically somehow, because in Bloodborne, if I got hurt, well, I don't want to risk getting more hurt just to get a little health back. But in Lies of P, I worked hard to damage an enemy, and I'll be damned if I'm just going to sit back and watch them recover. There is also a mechanic like Rally, where if you block and take some breakthrough damage, you can recover. This makes trying to perfect block worthwhile, even if you miss. I also felt incentivized to try new weapons and weapon arts because they decoupled the blade from the handle. The handle is what controls the weapon's attack animation and weapon skill, or fable art. The blade is what you use resources to level. You can combine most blades with most handles, so if you get a new weapon and you actually want to try it in combat, but don't want to throw resources at it, you can just combine your current leveled blade with the handle. There are some restrictions though, like if a handle is meant for rapier poking and you put it on a giant wrench, it won't be very effective. But even with just a few leveled blade categories, you can effectively try out most of the game's weapon abilities. You can also crank the handles towards dex or strength to improve your blade based on your puppet's stats. Really, just brilliant. Speaking of decoupling, they also decouple the armor stats from the costumes, so you can look like an adorable sailor boy puppet, but with tank armor on the inside. The utility of the summons is limited in two ways. First, you need a consumable item to summon them. Second, you can increase the power of the summons with coins. But these coins are tied to real-world time. You can only earn up to 8 coins before needing to retrieve them to earn more, so you can't just let the game run forever. I was never tempted to farm them, but I also didn't use them very often, so I'm not sure how well this real-world time system works if you do. Reopening the game to get footage for this video, it looks like the devs have added difficulty levels that you can adjust at any time. So I imagine, instead of farming coins, if you were really stuck on something, you might just lower the difficulty temporarily. The tutorial is actually pretty good. It has cards that actually explain the mechanics pretty well, and it holds the button mappings on the side for a good amount of time. Lies of P preserves what works so well about Souls-like difficulty, while realigning some of the incentives that had pushed towards playing too conservatively. I've learned a very dynamic, expressive playstyle that I've kept with me replaying the other games. How Nightreign handles difficulty. Nightreign is such a weird game. It takes one of the most fun parts of From games, the multiplayer co-op with minimal communication options, and runs with it. To start, you pick a character, each with different abilities. For example, my current favorite character, Duchess, has a passive ability called Magnificent Poise, which means you get an extra dodge. She has a skill called Restage, where all the damage nearby enemies have taken in the last 3 seconds is reapplied at 50%, including after reposts. It also applies more status effect as well. It's really fun. Finally, she has an ultimate called Finale. It makes you and nearby allies invisible for 10 seconds. It's okay. My other favorite character is Recluse. Her skill allows her to collect both FP and affinity residue from enemies, based on, I think, what kind of damage they last took. Then, based on the 3 residues collected of the 4 possible damage types, she casts 1 of 18 possible spells. Her ultimate is a Soul Blood song. She's also really fun. Once you have your character, you join a team of 1 to 2 friends, or online matchmaking, select a mission, and you all get dropped level 1 into an Elden Ring asset using map. Your goal is to level and get as much gear as possible before the time-based circles of Nightreign close in on you. When your first night falls, you fight a boss. Then, the second day, you can hit more difficult places on the map you missed the first day. Then, you fight a second night boss. Then, a chance to level once more and do some inventory management. And then, the final fight with the Night Lord. But this is a roguelite, so each attempt, you unlock relics that you can use to give your characters abilities on future runs. I really like these relics because they generally don't just give you boring generic buffs to make future runs easier. They generally nudge you towards changing your playstyle. The way you prioritize the map route, what weapons you choose. You can add damage types to starting weapons to make them more effective on the Night Lord you choose. Roguelites are meant to be replayed multiple times, and so usually there's some mechanic that blocks the player from winning on the first attempt. Sometimes concrete meta progression or unlocking them is required. In Slay the Spire, in theory, you could get absurdly lucky and win on your first try, but realistically, you need to unlock cards for future playthroughs. Sometimes, you're solidly blocked from a first attempt win by a pack of bears, like in Inscription, too fast, too soon. There are also games without required meta progression unlocks between runs, like Faster Than Light, where, in theory, you could win on your first run, but in practice, you wouldn't know how to balance your power and shields and weapons effectively to make it all the way to the end on your first attempt. Or Hades, where you might even come in fairly skilled, but still might need a few runs to get your bearings to get to the end. Nightreign is interesting because, in theory, players probably have a lot of the skill needed coming from Elden Ring, but what you are lacking is knowledge of the Nightreign specific systems. My friend and I did a first attempt where we dropped into the world and went to fight the first boss we saw, a terror bird. And it was going horribly slowly, and then suddenly I just started dropping health no matter what I did, and was so confused, and just died. Then I realized that the Nightreign was making my health drop. It took matchmaking with an online third person to realize we shouldn't just be fighting the first thing we found. The stat difference between level 1 and level 2 is basically double. A big part of the game is to figure out the order in which you should fight enemies in order to waste the least time possible. A player named Brandon carried us to our first win, and I'll never forget him. So one aspect of the difficulty is absolutely From Software's traditional inscrutability. Yes, there is a tutorial, and probably text instructions somewhere, but they were not enough to figure out what we were supposed to be doing. The tutorial ended up being Brandon, which is kind of cool. It kind of reminds me of how I figured out Gunder. Like, if it had been multiplayer with my friend, I would have been able to see the dodging and patience to learn from. In Nightreign, I followed Brandon through the chaos of what is an entirely unlabeled map and got a sense of the actual framework of the game, the way I was supposed to play. The difficulty is very Souls-like in that the combat is traditionally fairly challenging and requires learning the boss movesets. The bosses work better in Nightreign than in Elden Ring because they are very well tuned to player level. You always start at level 1. There is a max level of 15. There's natural gating. If the player doesn't get enough levels to beat the Night 1 boss, they won't make it to the Night 2 or final boss. If they do make it to the final boss, they leveled enough that they won't just be instantly wiped in a way that feels frustrating. But the final bosses are really challenging and aren't going to go down without a lot of work, even at max level. Relics may give you an edge, but so far for me, that maximum seems to be around 10% damage boost towards the final boss. So a 10-minute fight is now 9 minutes. That's motivating, but not enough to feel OP just from grinding relics. And grinding isn't really an issue because it's a roguelike. Doing runs is kind of the whole game. The bosses are complex and compelling, and just like in Elden Ring, are very clearly designed from the ground up for multiple players. No staggering these guys into oblivion. Arguably, the Night Lords themselves are so well designed for multiplayer, I suspect taking them on solo would be hard in a kind of unfun way. Like the first Night Lord, Gladys, splits into 3 and rejoins. I can't imagine dealing with 3 individual wolves solo. The good news is that, in my experience, the online matchmaking has been working surprisingly well. Like, I used to play a lot of Overwatch, and that negatively colored my opinion of random online game fellows. But other than netcode dropping people, everyone I've matched with has been fairly focused and good at communicating, which is funny because there's no way to communicate in the game other than pings, and I guess emotes. But usually we drop in, someone places a map ping, and everyone goes there and works together until someone places the next ping. It's so weird. The only griefing mechanic is one the devs explicitly added to the game, the Executor, or as I like to call him, Genji. The Executor has a really fun cursed sword that he can use to parry like in Sekiro. He also has basically no health, so when he inevitably misses his parry, you get to res him over and over and over But I appreciate that the devs added a character like Genji, so I can know from the starting character select screen if I should really focus on a win or, you know, maybe spend a little extra time here and there exploring, trying out new items. In any case, I think the difficulty mechanics are very compatible with the strange battle royale roguelite style. Pacing in Souls-likes. Another really important design category of From's traditional Souls-likes is pacing. Pacing is about balancing tension and excitement over time to create an engaging experience. You enter a new zone, you don't know what to expect. You meet your first enemy of the zone. Yikes. You see an item. You carefully try to get to the item. You die. You try again, and you keep exploring. Tension consistently fairly high because you would have to make your way through enemies again to get to where you are now. You find a shortcut. Relief. You try the boss for the first time and die horribly. You try more times and slowly get better. You start to get really close. You decide to use an item or summons to try to tip the balance. You win. You go back to Firelink and get your new levels and fashion souls. You enter a new zone. You don't know what to expect. Moving through the game, there are two main modes of play: explore and exploit. You explore slowly and carefully, not knowing where you're going, and then your second time through, you run past enemies to get to where you want to go. Explore has high tension. Exploit is lower, but satisfying in context. The tension and excitement get high, but are also dynamic, and this pacing makes for really compelling gameplay. But if you zoom out, there's also good pacing over the course of the game. There are slodgy zones, trap-filled zones, and Orlandos. Each has a different level of tension, and you even progress through the areas at different speeds. If you zoom out even farther, when you get through a whole run, you get your new Game Plus, which is really just a victory lap where you get to keep all of your fancy upgraded equipment and outfits to effectively do a boss rush more powerful than you were the first time. You know where to go, what to unlock. It's very satisfying. Pure exploit mode. Finally, you can add tension through challenge runs, like speed, hitless, deathless. I got really into deathless runs in Dark Souls 1, and the strategy of what areas to avoid, what boss attacks to be super careful of, it's really a whole new game speeding past the regular enemies, taking weird shortcuts and learning cheeses. It's really fun. If you're the kind of person who likes fillets of soul, you're probably going to keep coming back for more. There are several mechanics that are important for keeping the pacing dynamic. One is, as mentioned above, the general discouraging of grinding. Nothing slows down the tension like hitting the same enemy and reloading over and over and over. Another mechanic is the variety of items and the puzzles around their collection. You see an item on a weird ledge and you have to figure out how to get there. Maybe you discover a hidden door. Maybe you just die a lot. But I was very motivated to collect items, not just from the compulsion of a collectathon, but because they had genuine utility. Frozen souls to prevent having to grind if I'm super close to the next level. Homeward bones to teleport. Uniquely interesting weapons and really important upgrade items. And of course, the fashion souls. Not every item is going to be useful, but enough of them are, I'm willing to take the gamble. Just not in Sekiro. To me in Sekiro, the collectibles felt kind of useless. Like in other games, I was always really excited to find cool weapons or fashion souls, but I ended up playing Sekiro like a boss rush because I didn't really find the items very interesting. I just didn't want to collect 30 candies and balloons to get one prosthetic attachment. The item distribution didn't feel well tuned to me. The Bloodborne trick weapons, on the other hand, I found so fun, I wanted to collect everything to see what weird thing I'd get. And of course, the fashion souls. Another mechanic that keeps the pacing dynamic is the multiplayer systems. I personally don't have a ton to say about the online play of the games because I didn't play any of them right as they came out. I was only invaded a handful of times, and the PvP felt so steeped in the weird meta of people still PvPing years after release.
I'm sorry.
But I really enjoyed sunbrowing to help other players on my favorite bosses. Sunbrowing is strangely very relaxing. You get to know the bosses so well in a very low stakes environment, and you get to practice for solo challenge runs. If you're really struggling with a boss, you can go sunbrow for a break and get the added benefit of the health increase. Online play definitely gives the game a more dynamic range of experience. The games also generally avoid duplicate bosses, without a good reason. In Dark Souls 1, you fight versions of the Asylum Demon several times in several different areas, with different types of damage, but a similar moveset. And it kind of works. It's the first boss in the game with the simplest moveset, so it kind of feels like a freebie coming across it in a more difficult zone. Also, it's a reminder of how far you came. And it's the only repeat boss. You fight earlier bosses as regular enemies, but they are much easier to tackle and also feel empowering instead of duplicative. One of my favorite fights in Dark Souls 3 is the return of Champion Gunder, with an augmented moveset and a darkened version of Firelink, the haunting atmosphere of a place familiar yet unfamiliar, and his expanded moveset is a delight. It doesn't feel like cheaply packaging reused assets to make up more playtime, because they did it exactly once. Looking at you, Sekiro. All the funding went to that intro cutscene. Side note on Sekiro, I think it plays the most with pacing. It's effectively a Metroidvania where you can get hard blocked from progressing branches without the right upgrade. This leads to dual moments of mild frustration realizing you're stuck and will have to backtrack, and the exhilaration of backtracking with a new ability or stronger stat. The well-tuned pacing also gives the overall game itself a character. There's humor in the game, like when you see 30 of one of the worst bosses in the game blocking you from the bonfire, but you can just avoid them. Or, pinwheel. Or thinking you're going to fight some super cool fire witches, but it's an awful tree. The layout of the passages and the intentional cheekiness of the traps give the feeling of a trickster character behind the scenes. The environment isn't lazy and samey. It's also not off-puttingly cruel. Usually. Overall, the pacing of the SoulsLikes is dynamic in a way that makes the games memorable. Pacing in Elden Ring. So let's talk about the pacing of Elden Ring. There were aspects I liked. They did something kind of interesting in that the game is open world, but there are also zones that are entirely linear. These zones have the same tight design that I would expect from a Souls-like. For me, the tension was sometimes off, because of the difficulty, but I generally enjoyed these segments. I also generally liked the balance between relaxing open world exploration and more tense linear segments. If you're not having a fun time in an open world fight, you can just ride away. The stakes are lower. Then, if you're getting overwhelmed by a particularly frustrating linear section, you can go take a break exploring something else. I actually think the contrast between the open world and linear segments pacing is really great. My complaint is actually that there's just too much of everything to give anything any particular character or weight. In Dark Souls, for example, think of the feeling of Blighttown. It's not just the dingy visuals, but the experience of dealing with the constant poison and toxin status effects, the flying bugs. It makes it feel mechanically icky. Tomb of the Giants is dark, but that darkness is also a mechanic that makes it feel claustrophobic. You're unsure of your next step. And Orlando's architecture is splendid and sturdy, and the Silver Knight attacks are rigid and powerful, yet predictable. You move through each of these zones differently because of the mechanics leveraged in the zone, not just the visuals. I played the base game of Elden Ring for over 100 hours, and while the different zones are very visually distinct, other than Caelid, I don't really remember any areas feeling distinct in terms of combat or strategy or speed of exploration. You could swap the textures and reskin the zones, and I wouldn't notice, because while the visual characterization is very strong, the mechanical pacing just isn't. Even where Elden Ring does have zone-based mechanics, they aren't memorable enough alone to give the zones their own character, because there are just too many zones. The game is so big. The more areas you try to strongly characterize, the more samey they will all start to feel. This led me to feel the macro tension excitement graph as pretty binary, open world or linear zone. The immense size of the game makes it feel bloated and undirected in just the amount of stuff. There are so many weapons, and to be clear, they have some super cool weapon arts and animations and design. Even within a class, there are a lot. But since you can easily respec at any time, really, you can use any weapon. Too many weapon options, and they all start to feel less special or interesting. I mentioned in Bloodborne that I really liked trying the new trick weapons every time I got one, and I still remember a lot of them. I picked up so many weapons in Elden Ring, I stopped even trying the weapon arts. Just too much of a good thing. The duplicate bosses in the catacombs begin to feel like content padding. There is so much stuff. A collection for every color of grenade, arrow type, so many status effects. Like, why have both sleep and madness? They may be different colors, but they're pretty similar. You can also gather plants and craft items. And that's nice, I guess. I'm conflicted on this one. I don't like it, but I also can just pretty easily ignore it, so it's not a major complaint. Except no, this is a video for getting all of the complaints out of my system. And it may be obvious by this point that I don't play a lot of open world games, but what is the purpose of the crafting? Like, it would be one thing if you went to a cozy campfire and crafted some coffee in your downtime, because that's pleasant for the player. It's why we like watching cooking shows. The predictable motions are relaxing, results look tasty, or like they smell herbal. In Elden Ring, crafting is an instant button press in a menu, so that's not it. You can also use crafting as a mechanic that costs the player some time in a dangerous situation to add tension. Or you can even have a skill tree for crafting, so you can feel rewarded for making fancier and fancier items to use or sell, so you can get money in a currency to buy other things you want. That's fun. But in Elden Ring, why take the time to collect a plant to make an item to hit an enemy, instead of just taking the 5 seconds to just hit the enemy? Why go to that effort? By the time you scroll through your 12 grenade types to find the one with the right damage, you could hit the enemy several times. I mean, I'm joking, I can kind of understand the appeal. People like collecting. I collected every horse I could in Red Dead 2, even after falling in love with Allison Rains. But the goal for me in Red Dead 2 was the vibes. I wanted Arthur to have all the horses, and I wanted to ride different ones based on my whims with a coordinated mustache. Collecting and brushing down horses, slowly picking up ammo, and brewing coffee were in service of the heart of the game, which was fleshing out Arthur and his world. The goal for me in Elden Ring was to roleplay as a stabby Fashion Souls mannequin. Collecting lots of stuff just feels like a distraction from the flow. Micromanaging inventory doesn't elevate the Souls-like experience I'm looking for. It just kind of dilutes it. Luckily, I can just not craft. Finally, zooming out on pacing, with the ability to respec and swap around classes, the game does give some variety in playstyle if the players decide to do this. The trade-off with this flexibility, and just how big the game is that it loses out on multiple runs. This is anecdotal, but I don't personally know anyone who did a New Game Plus or challenge run on Elden Ring. In fact, most of my friends never got around to finishing the game. They got full at some point and moved on. There wasn't anything compelling enough to drive them forward towards the ending. But we'll get to that in the last Elden Ring segment. Pacing and Lies of P. Lies of P is generally very similar to From's Souls-likes in terms of pacing, but with a few upgrades. One of the things that annoyed me in the Souls games was running out of Estus flasks while exploring, and then feeling like I needed to backtrack and rest instead of venturing forward. Bloodborne has a mechanic of blood vials, which are consumable. They are purchasable, and many enemies drop them, which is great for keeping up the rhythm of exploration, except when it isn't great, and you feel like you have to start farming to get enough for a hard section or a boss. Sekiro suffers from a similar issue when you have to take a break from a boss fight to go grind to refill your resurrection nodes, which works when the game has branching options to go explore instead, but falls flat when you don't. I really don't like the farming incentives in Bloodborne and Sekiro, and I'm glad they moved away from that. Sekiro, and the game that shall not be named, had both regular Estus flasks and pellets or life gems that were also consumables. These consumables slowly raise health just a bit. I found they worked pretty well because they weren't good enough to justify farming, but they extended exploration. They could also just maybe let you last long enough in a boss fight, if you were lucky, but still incentivize collecting more Estus flasks. In Lies of P, the solution is quite elegant. After using your final Estus flask, you actually have the ability to charge a new one by hitting enemies. You can't farm, because this ability to charge only happens after you use your last, and gets you back to 1. I found myself slowing down a bit and playing more carefully until I had enough hits in to recharge, but I really liked the effect it had on pacing. FP, or Fable Points, used in weapon arts, are also recovered by landing more hits. Lies of P also has a good solution to my damage type consumable issue. I never feel like it's the right time to use a limited item, so I never do. Grindstones give your weapon temporary damage types and can be used once between rests. You can use them during boss combats to give you a boost, but the time they take to activate leaves you open, so it's an interesting trade-off. Importantly though, the fact that they recharged after every rest meant that I actually used them. Lies of P also has good characterization and pacing of zones. Grimy, puppet-ridden streets, the swamp with the weird mutant guys, the World Fair-style pavilions. They all have not just different visual stylings, but mechanics that make them feel different. I would like to see a bit more diversity, but overall, a good job and very coherent. Zooming out, New Game Plus opens new mechanics on the upgrade tree. I also like how there's more to do in the Firelink Shrine equivalent. It's pleasant to inhabit. There are multiple characters, each with meaningful systems to experiment with and upgrade. Lies of P also has 3 enemy categories: puppets, carcasses, and alchemists. This is way more tractable for matching up damage types because you can kind of have a mini build for each kind. The zones generally swap between them, so before you head out to a puppet zone, you can equip your puppet shredder and electrical stun arm. It's a nice downtime to organize those upgrades and mess around with your weapon formation combinations. Also, we'll get to this later, but the characters aren't all complete weirdos, so that's nice. Pacing in Nightreign. As a pretty well-designed roguelite, Nightreign really has the pacing down. The moment-to-moment is very fast-paced. A super sprint with no stamina cost is added to get around. It's like you're your own horse. Some mechanics have been shaved away to save time. Like there's no concept of item weight or load, and the characters have a set leveling ladder. Then the characters have their own movement abilities that make movement in fights extremely fun. The movement abilities really make the characters feel different between each other than just, this guy has a big axe. This guy has a great sword. On the individual run basis, the morning of the first day is exploration and making a plan, seeing what routes are possible. Then the tension rises as the Nightreign comes and the first night boss appears. The second morning, the tension is higher than the first day as you take on more challenging mini-bosses or route your way through areas like volcanoes while trying to keep a close watch on the Nightreign. I will say, it's kind of weird going from second night boss almost straight into final boss, but I don't know, I kind of stopped thinking about it after a while. Then, across runs, there are different goals. Each of the Night Lords has different weaknesses the game just actually tells you before you select that expedition. Prioritizing different mini-bosses and areas makes the runs feel pretty different. Then, there are the Shifting Earth events that throw a wrench in by adding large geographical features that are usually actually kind of linear in nature, so you have to budget enough time or you can get trapped when the Nightreign arrives. Finally, there are also remembrance quests for different characters, which give specific tasks to complete, like defeating a golden hippo or fighting your clone. There also might be more, as I haven't finished it yet, but I never feel like I'm grinding runs. While the pacing is very different from the SoulsLike games, I think it's great. It combines the inherent tension with the excitement and novelty of a roguelite really well. The netcode is bad, though. Nothing like getting booted towards the end of a promising run. SoulsLike world building. Story spoiler time. I've played a lot of really good games, but the ones I still think about years later are the ones with the strongest characterization and world building. Mechanics are enough to make a good game, but not enough on their own to embed it in my memory. One of the things SoulsLike games do masterfully well,
yes, indeed. It is called Lothric.
is the characterization of bosses.
Aldrich, Saint of the Deep. Farron's Undead Legion, the Abyss Watchers.
It starts with the very opening sequences. The game has just begun, and you're already really excited with all of the possibilities of what lies ahead, and questions. Like, what kind of attacks will a Gravelord use during a fight, given that arguably all attacks are death attacks? Or multiple Abyss Watchers? Well, that's going to be crazy hard if you have to fight them all. Or how are you going to fight the Saint of the Deep? He seems like a slime. Well, that's going to be crazy. You have questions and excitement and names and images in your head for what's coming. And then these characterized bosses keep being reinforced. NPCs mention them, item descriptions reference them or give hints to their story, especially items dropped from their zone's enemies. Their whole zone is based on their characterization. Gravelord Nido has darkness and skellies. This zone has crabs. Not sure why. Aldrich, Saint of the Deep, has really interesting foreshadowing, because first, you go through a weird, gross, cathedral-esque zone, which makes sense. He is a saint and a slime, after all. And then you go up to Anarlando, a zone from the first game. Well, that's weird. Why would... Oh. Okay. Their boss music is thematically designed to match the tone, and as you progress to the next phase of the boss, the music evolves as well. Then, as mentioned in the difficulty section, you learn the careful dance of the boss fights themselves. Their moveset and their animations further add substance to their character. Afterwards, you get their armor, and sometimes their flesh and hair as a kind of fun souvenir that reminds you how great the boss fight was for the rest of the game. And really, the Fashion Souls is just absurd and delightful. It adds an additional layer of surreal charm, and clearly a lot of effort and visual design went into these pieces. There's a lot of detail, and I would know, because I spent a long time recreating one. All this characterization does an excellent job at building anticipation to motivate you through the hard parts of the zones, and also cements the bosses in your memory. I think Sekiro doesn't do as good a job at the story-based characterizations in the lead-up. The opening cinematic is absurdly high budget, but my comprehension, even the second time playing it, was very, very low. It wasn't until I looked up the plot on Wikipedia that I finally understood that there are at least 3 factions. There's the Ashina clan, led by Kensai Ishin Ashina. There's also the Interior Ministry of the Central Forces, who are seeking to unify Japan. Owl, wandering shinobi with no allegiance, who rescues young Sekiro. The Divine Heir, who was defended by Owl, who commanded Sekiro to serve him as master, but captured by the Ashina clan. Bandits, no allegiance, although maybe secretly commanded by Owl in order to fake his death. Still not sure why he fakes his death. Lady Butterfly, trained young Sekiro, but has allegiance to Owl, since Owl actually betrays Sekiro. Emma, supporter of Sekiro, but actually doctor of Ishin Ashina, who is in fact not aligned with Clan Ashina and his grandson, Genichiro, because he does not seek the dragon heritage. Senpo monks, allied to centipedes, and in theory the divine child of rejuvenation, although the divine child actually seems to support the divine heir in Immortal Severance. And you fight Ishin Ashina at the end because he has been summoned by Genichiro, not because old Ishin has a surprise heel turn. I thought my reading comprehension was just 2nd grade level on my first playthrough, so I feel a lot better now that I've looked it up and decided that it's definitely at least 12th grade. But Sekiro makes up for confusing narrative characterization by having the bosses be very different in their fighting style. Like, when I remember Lady Butterfly, I have no idea what her zone was like. I don't remember if I had heard of her before her fight, but I remember her fight very, very well. She is her moveset, her large movement range, her illusions, her pace of combat. I spent longer getting to know her than I did most of the bosses in the Souls games. If there wasn't so much depth in the Sekiro combat, I wouldn't have the patience to feel like the difficulty was worth pushing past. If it was less difficult, it just wouldn't be very memorable. And side note, but I really like how in Sekiro, the game goes out of its way to assure you that these monks you're about to kill, well, I'm the Buddha in the painting, and I can assure you they're definitely corrupt. The game gives you this assurance not once, but twice. And I love that, especially given that slaughtering ostensibly Catholic-esque clergy is never questioned. Another thing that works really well for the world building in these games is that the state of the world, respawning enemies everywhere, only small pockets of...
If you've any sense, you go find a coffin to huddle up inside.
friendly faces, the immense tension works with the setting of the stories. Lordran and Lothric are dying worlds that aren't permitted to die, trapped in a cycle of bleak reanimation through the linking of the fire. Yharnam is experiencing the horrors of a plague. Sekiro is set in a fictional version of the Sengoku Jidai, a period of intense fighting and mass upheaval. The mechanic, resurrection, thematically sickens and corrupts. Undying begets stagnation. In all of these settings, the tone matches the mechanics. Finally, the quests. I've already made my opinions known on most of the NPCs.
We'll need another 3, no, maybe 5 bodies.
Clearly, you're not that sort of woman.
You're a wicked one, aren't you?
He's not very talkative.
しっかり噛んで食べてくださいね。
If I didn't know better, I'd think you had feelings for me.
They're just absurdly weird. The voice actors are actually professional Shakespearean actors that I'm sure are incredibly talented, but they are directed to be so strange. Their words don't make sense, their motivations don't make a ton of sense. They have quests that would be really hard to decipher, except luckily, the game is linear, so you'll probably just bump into them later and can talk to them again. And maybe they'll try to kill you this time, or maybe not. Who knows? If you want to actually do their quest properly, you probably have to talk to a friend or look it up, because how would you possibly know that to save Solaire, you actually have to join the Order of Chaos and give Quilag's sister 30 humanities to open a door to Lost Izalith that lets you kill all 9 Chaos bugs, preventing Solaire from later thinking the Sunlight Maggot is, I guess, actually the gross incandescence he has been looking for? I like doing NPC quests, but I have no idea what I'm supposed to do with these guys. But it's okay, because it's not a big part of the game. They are super weird, but that's okay. I run into them, I listen to their weird stories, I buy their weird items, I listen to their weird laughs. And then I move on with my day. They add a bit of flavor to the madness and desperation of the worlds. And maybe you aren't supposed to be able to complete their weird quests to save them without cheating and looking it up, because really, permanent death actually seems like a bit of a blessing. Elden Ring world building. George R.R. Martin was an interesting choice for the world building of Elden Ring. Not because he's a bad writer at all, but if you've read the Song of Ice and Fire books, not just seen the Game of Thrones TV show, you know that he goes hard into details, with complex, large ensemble casts, with a wide range of characters, all with different, intricate backstories and motivations. And even in the mundane details of the world building, his books so expertly capture the absurd frameworks of rules and procedures and hierarchies in medieval society. They read like a textbook, explaining how the Order of Maesters has different remedies at their disposal that they distill from various plants that can be used for sedation or pain, but not the bloody flux, which devastated armies since the Dawn Age. The books are well written and popular, but there's also a reason the TV shows didn't have a narrator going off on tangents about how the Dornish inheritance laws differ from the rest of Westeros, with gender-blind primogeniture, meaning Doran Martell's heir apparent is his daughter, since Dorne had only joined the realm a century ago through a marriage alliance. At least, I assume. I didn't actually watch it. Anyways, when I heard George R.R. Martin was going to contribute to Elden Ring, I thought, that's cool. It sure will be an unexpected delight to play a From Software game with characters not so weird as to make them entirely incoherent, and with enough dialogue and focus on plot and story to carry the immense weight of George R.R. Martin's world-building capabilities. I'm sure they wouldn't just build an absurdly complex world and then keep their old strategy of cryptic voice lines, hard-to-find NPCs with order-independent quests, impossible to find in a open-world game. That would be a choice. And it certainly was. Now, to be clear, I'm not really a fan of overly reductive follow quest marker, talk to person, go to next quest marker, fight thing, return to person. Yeah, it's kind of repetitive and uninspired. And there are some games that manage to get rid of quest markers fairly effectively. Outer Wilds has excellent exploration without explicitly directing the player. It works because it has a wheel and spoke design that prevents the scope from being overwhelming. You could kind of argue it's not a true open world game, but more of a hybrid in the way you move through space. And the instrument songs are just really well-designed quest markers. The Long Dark manages to not have quest markers by being hyper-realistic in scale and travel speed. Items are rare, and the landscape is desolate. So while there is certainly exploration, it's clear when you see something important. And that's sometimes what quest markers are, letting you know what's important in a game with a lot of stuff. Other times, quest markers are a skeleton to hold up bad or just inconsistently effective writing. Red Dead 2 allows you to turn off the quest markers and navigate using your map. And I liked that a lot for some quests, but others I just got confused and had to turn it on or look up what to do. But I want to see more resources and effort put into the writing of quests and NPCs. I actually love the idea of maybe more like the Witcher studio, teaming up with George R.R. Martin and creating a complex world and characters, and their quests not marked on a map. I like the idea of talking with NPCs, getting to know their backstories, their goals, their fears, and then using that information to deduce where I should go find them next, how I should help them, or protect them, or maybe murder them. But the whole reason quest markers exist is because writing your game and quests well enough for at least a fair amount of players to be able to figure out is really hard and requires a lot of resources and effort and playtesting. And a lot of players, especially ones sick of bad writing, often don't actually listen to NPCs at all and just click through the dialogue. It's a hard problem. Elden Ring solved the problem of quest markers by just, patching in character markers as an afterthought. I played a lot of the game before they were added, and if I met someone and thought they seemed interesting, I looked up what I was supposed to do. And if not, I just moved on and hoped it worked out. It never did. But okay, let's zoom out from the character quests and talk about the world. I'm sure someone thought it would be the most clever thing in the world to make sure everyone in the goddamn game had stupid fucking absurdly similar names. Some have a 3-syllable name starting with the letter M. Melania, Melina, Megala, Millicent, America, Malekith. And a few 2 syllables. Mali, Margaret, Morgoth, Mogwin. And then a few R1s for good measure. Radon and Radagon, Raya and Rykard, Roderica and Rani, Ranala and Rolana. And finally, a lot just starting with God. Godwin, Godric, Godfrey, Godefroy. And like, maybe that would be fine in a book where I can go back and check who is who whenever I need to, but in a game, it's a terrible idea. Like, sure, it's supposed to indicate lineages, I guess, but it makes everything so much more confusing. Now, to be fair, I am extremely dyslexic to the point where I can't remember my lefts and rights, but my friends are normal, and they had to create this horrific whiteboard crime map trying to piece it all together, so I don't think it was just me. The Song of Ice and Fire books are complex and have a ton of characters and complex relationships, and they also have almost 2 million words. Elden Ring does not, and cannot support the weight of this amount of characters. It's a long game, but you spend the vast majority of it stabbing stuff, not talking to NPCs, watching cutscenes, or reading books. And that's disappointing because I think there's a lot of potential. I also think, however, that the story is not right for the game's mechanics of enemies everywhere constantly regenerating. Like the other From games are all dying worlds, wrought with chaos. One of the Elden Ring endings is the Age of Order, which is where you bring order to the world by cutting out the influence of the gods. But like, what does that even look like? Like, okay, in Witcher, there are like towns and cities with people in them. So if you got the Age of Order ending, I'd be like, cool, I guess the people in those towns can stop worshipping the gods. Who in Elden Ring benefits from order? Like, are the weird Kalid birds going to bow to order and rebuild society? There's no society in this game to reclaim order. There's like 10 regular humans in the whole game. Then there's the Blessing of Despair ending, where I guess everyone is cursed, except like, curse is the whole state of the current world. I guess everyone will now eat dung in addition to corpses. If you want these to be meaningful endings, you have to be able to understand the consequences. But I've never understood the consequences less. That's why I pieced out with my witchy waifu to go, I guess, explore space. Because that seemed like a logical, motivated ending. And finally, my biggest disappointment of all. The intro sequence. I watched it like 20 times, and each time I was filled with anticipation. Arise now, ye tarnished! Wow, I can't wait to fight these bosses. The ever-brilliant Gold Mask. Wow, I wonder if he'll have some cool attack where he throws his mask at you like a boomerang and you get temporarily blinded. I bet the loathsome Dung Eater will have all kinds of crazy status effects. The all-knowing guy will totally do something cool with the ears and eyeballs. Maybe he'll possess different kinds of enemies, and there'll be like a strategy around pivoting around which one he possesses. Friends, I made it through a good half of the game before I realized that these were the same people in the Round Table Hold. I had just assumed that they would be giant epic bosses, so I didn't even think to recognize them. Like, I recognized Fia, Deathbed Companion, but I assumed she was like a Ishin thing, where I'd get to fight her later. And I guess I assumed the Dung Eater was like a ghost or something, I don't know. I was excited to fight them, and you kind of do fight some of them in like a PvP mode, but they're not bosses. I was so disappointed. Then, some of the bosses are in the intro sequence, like Malenia and Radon, and I guess Rykard, but they aren't given names. So when you talk to Gideon, who I straight up did not recognize from the cutscene at all, he gives you a list of bosses and a little information snippet. But like, you can't match the names to the intro images, so it doesn't mean much and isn't that effective at building anticipation. Why does the intro hype up the boring, tarnished randos? Why? They don't need any hype. There's nothing about them worthy of hyping. They should be the clips in the beginning, and then you hype the bosses. It's fine. It's fine. I like the Erd Tree. I think the Erd Tree is pretty great. I like how you can see it from around the map. I like how it catches on fire. That's a good tree. Lies of P world building. Lies of P reminds me a lot of the visuals and tone of BioShock Infinite. The world is thrown into chaos with the robot revolt, and the story feels nicely compatible with the tone of gameplay. I do think that there was a bit of a missed opportunity in the marketing though. My friends and I only really associate the story of Pinocchio with the Disney version, which really scared the heck out of me as a kid. But now I find it kind of trite and childish. Like, I associate it with the movie Dumbo, which also scared me as a kid. I don't have positive nostalgia for Pinocchio in the same way that I do for like Nightmare Before Christmas. In my head, the idea of Pinocchio is kind of stodgy and saccharine, like Werther's candies. So when I heard there was going to be a SoulsLike using the theme, it made me think of those cringy, edgy fairy tale movies like Edgy Snow White or Edgy Robin Hood. When I told my friends I was playing it, they made fun of me. Lies of P, the Nyokyo is silent. So edgy. But that's kind of not it at all. And I kind of chalk this up to the studio being South Korean and localization being really hard. Like, the bones of the original Pinocchio story are cool enough, and if I came across a South Korean story I thought was really cool on paper, South Koreans might just as easily associate it with media that I wouldn't know about. In any case, the Lies of P story is a sci-fi interpretation much closer to Blade Runner, where the question is really, what does it mean to be human? If an android, or puppet, can empathize with humans well enough to know when it is appropriate to lie, and break a rule of its programming to do so, is that a fair Turing test of being a real boy? Again, I kind of wish the game had dropped the explicit Pinocchio references and maybe just had nods to it, at least for the Western localization. You can choose in the game to be more robotic or more human in the way you interact with the world, and I think it's pretty well done. The Souls resource is called Ergo. Cogito ergo sum. The overall plot writing is pretty solid. Zooming in, the character writing is also pretty good. The characters are believable and nuanced and well voice acted. There are music records that you can play in the Firelink Shrine equivalent that are really beautiful and remind me of Transistor. Overall, while I personally don't think I would play the game just for the story, you can set the difficulty to story mode, but the story complements the excellent gameplay really nicely and elevates the game as a whole. I do think the bosses could be better characterized. I was thinking about replaying the game before writing this video, and I decided not to. Not because it wasn't incredibly fun the first playthrough, but because I could remember the zones a lot better than the bosses. I personally don't feel super accomplished getting through zones, just from defeating interesting, challenging bosses. When I think about replaying Dark Souls 3, I think about Nameless King, or as I like to call him, Gwilliam, Lady Elfrida, and Gale. I also think about the swamp and the catacombs, but my excitement for those bosses strongly overrides my dread of making my way again through the zone slog. The bosses in Lies of P were really good. Interesting animations and attacks, well implemented, diverse in aesthetic and pacing and strategy, but I don't really remember them because they weren't strongly characterized. Same with Bloodborne, honestly. I really enjoyed it when I played it, but I didn't want to replay it, in part because I borrowed my friend's PlayStation to play it the first time and didn't really want to figure out how to record from a console, but also because I don't have strong characterized memories of bosses I'm excited to re-engage. The one I remember the best is the nursemaid one, because I went on a long internet rabbit hole on hidden mother photography, because it's creepy as fuck, but that was external to the game. Lies of P and Bloodborne are both great games, and effective characterization is hard to do successfully, without going to the other extreme and making the information repetitive and aggravating. They are both also very well characterized as games themselves. They have a very specific feeling associated with the memory of playing them. The Lies of P world is present and concrete, especially since everyone isn't a mythical weirdo. Nightreign world building. Nightreign had an intro, but honestly I didn't really pay attention to it the first time because I assumed it would be wrapped up in Elden Ring lore that I had completely forgotten. What I got was, sometime after the Elden Ring shattering, there is now Nightreign and a Night Lord. There are Nightfarers who fight back. Cool. Got to fight the Night Lord. Side note, but I was rewatching the intro, and I'm pretty sure Priestess Duchess has a different accent than she does later.
Brought together by happenstance, their commonalities are but few. No shared station, era, or even purpose. Perhaps you don't remember. All your talk of getting revenge upon the Night Lord, how you would never forgive it, and so on.
That's fine. Whatever. The characters are still weird and don't have much to say.
I suppose you're thinking that the earrings normally come in pairs. Oh, forgive me. I've likely talked your ear off.
Genji supposedly has armor welded to his flesh, so he can't talk. But look what I found. His lips are free. He just chooses not to. But none of this really matters, because the story, and even kind of the world building, doesn't really matter for this kind of game. Like, I enjoyed some Apex Legends a while ago, and I couldn't tell you anything about that game's world building or story. It's just not the point. Nightreign also reuses bosses from Elden Ring, and Dark Souls 3 and 1. They show up as the night bosses before the Night Lord. And honestly, it's kind of fun. Like a Star Wars amusement park ride that pulls kind of unrelated references from all three of the trilogies to appeal to the whole family. What actually pleasantly surprised me was the remembrances. Each of the characters has a journal, and as you progress it, you can activate quests that advance their character stories. These stories are just short pieces of writing, but I actually really liked them. They feel very much written by different characters, instead of falling prey to samey fantasy voice a lot of writing does. I think they are actually very solid characterizations. There's also a clever bit of design there. Since the game is multiplayer, the overarching story timeline progresses as you defeat bosses in multiplayer. So, the state of your roundtable hold and the impact of the main story on the characters progresses with the multiplayer. But the remembrance quests are remembrances of how the roundtable hold used to be. They are generally played single player and are decoupled from the multiplayer, allowing progression in both independently, which is pretty cool. I also had no idea remembrances existed for most of my time playing the game, because I didn't bother to wander around the roundtable hold or whatever it's called, because it's confusing to navigate and seemed pointless to the game. But I was wrong. Side note on this, there's a visual codex book in the game that's kind of wild. It lists out every mechanic in the game and kind of reads like a corporate project spec document that they just copied into the game. And if you don't believe me, there's literally an entry in the visual codex on the visual codex. So meta. I haven't finished Nightreign yet, and I imagine many of you haven't either, though by the time I actually release this video, that might be a laughable statement. But I think the story and world building of Nightreign are sufficient for what it is. Not a game that really needs a lot of world building. Conclusion. Wow. I feel so much better. I've been holding this in for so long. I mean, that's not true. I've complained about my pet peeves with Elden Ring every polite chance I've gotten, but it's nice to lay it all out in one place. That way, at future parties, if it happens to come up in conversation, instead of turning dramatically and crying, "Oh, Elden Ring, my greatest disappointment. It all began when I heard it was going to be open world, and George R.R. But now I can just sigh gently, take a sip of my beverage, hand them a business card with a QR code linked to this video, and move on, letting the kindled flame of my frustration be quenched by the darkness of the abyss. Elden Ring isn't a bad game. It just has the problems that you get when you merge two different genres that aren't super compatible. But I'm glad they made it, because more than anything, I appreciate innovation. Anything new and interesting, even if it's not perfect. And it was interesting to see all the ways in which it didn't work super well. Nightreign is also interesting in that it does actually work really well. I'm also really looking forward to what the Lies of P developer, Round 8 Studios, does next. There are some good Souls-likes, and there are a lot of bad Souls-likes, but I'm excited to see how the genre evolves. More games, please. Shout out to my friend for helping me on my very first fight with Gunder. This video is your fault. Also, thanks to my Patreon members, whose generous contribution allowed me to create this Sister Frida outfit. I posted my creation timeline there, so you can watch me curse at the 3D designers who made the tunic of this outfit out of a MC Escher Klein bottle and possibly conical weave. It forced me to put weird plates in the back to maintain the illusion of like a single front panel. Bonus Patreon fact. Miyazaki tricked Sony into letting him make Demon Souls. He told them he was going to make a game like Oblivion. Instead, he made the game he always wanted. Bonus Patreon fact. Miyazaki was inspired by reading English fantasy books as a child, and when he didn't fully understand the language, he just filled in the gaps. Bonus Patreon fact. The Lies of P features Pinocchio riding a submarine called the Pistris. This is an ancient Greek word for sea monster or whale, and references Pinocchio being swallowed by the sea creature. Yet another Patreon fact. This gets posted on forums a lot, but the Capra demon has a bull head despite being named after a goat, and the Taurus demon has a goat head despite being named after a bull. Another Patreon fact. Male and female characters have different starting speeds for running. So I looked into this a bit, and I think it's the acceleration going up to running, which is still pretty funny.